Last week, I did something I've never done before in 3 years of running this business. I issued a public apology to over 1,000 subscribers. Not because I had to, not because someone made me, but because my values demanded it. And in the days that followed, I sat with something really uncomfortable. A voice that said, "This is proof you don't know what you're doing." Maybe you know that voice. Maybe you've heard it after a job that didn't work out, or a professional relationship fell apart, or you made a decision that cost you something. That voice that shows up right when you're already down and says, "See, I told you." Did you know that trauma impacts how we navigate our careers, but most career advice ignores this reality? Imagine feeling confident and safe at work while honoring your healing journey. Welcome to your Trauma Wise Career Guide, the podcast that reimagines career development for trauma survivors. I'm your host, Cindy Bennett, a trauma survivor turned trauma-informed career coach and founder of the Resilient Career Academy. If you're navigating your career while honoring your healing journey, you are in the right place. Today, I want to talk about that voice. And more importantly, I want to talk about what it means when someone who teaches trauma-informed career development has to practice it on herself. Because here's what I've learned. The moment you most want to call something a failure is almost always the moment it's trying to teach you the most important thing. So let's get into it. First, I want to talk about what we've been taught about failure. And I want to start here because I think we skip this part too fast. Before we can talk about turning failure into fuel, before any of that reframing work is possible, we have to acknowledge what most of us were actually taught about what it means to get something wrong. And for a lot of us, especially those of us with trauma histories, the answer is we were taught that mistakes were dangerous. Not inconvenient, not embarrassing, dangerous. Most of us didn't grow up in environments where mistakes were safe. We grew up in environments where mistakes had consequences, sometimes painful ones, where getting it wrong meant something bad was going to happen, where you learned very quickly to be careful, to be perfect, to not draw attention to yourself when things fell apart. So when something goes wrong professionally, when you leave a job or lose a client or make a public misstep or invest in something that doesn't pan out, it doesn't just feel like a setback. It can feel like confirmation of something you've been afraid was true about you all along. And I want to name that because I think it's really important. There's a difference between what actually happened, the facts of the situation, and the story your nervous system layers on top of it. The facts might be, I joined a program that wasn't the right fit and I left. But the story the nervous system tells, this means that I'm bad at this. This means that I don't know what I'm doing. This means that I'm not cut out for it. The professional world loves to talk about failing forward. You've heard it. I've heard it. Honestly, it's not wrong. There is wisdom in that framing. But what bothers me about how it usually gets delivered is that it skips something really important. It skips the part where failing actually hurts, especially for trauma survivors, where the stakes of getting it wrong have historically been so much higher than just embarrassment, where failure wasn't just a learning experience, it was sometimes a safety issue, where the consequences were real and your nervous system remembers that, even when your mind tries to move on. For many of us, failure was never just failure. It was evidence. Evidence that we weren't safe, that we weren't enough, that we weren't worthy of the thing we wanted. And I want to say something clearly. That is not a mindset problem. That is not something you can just think your way out of with positive affirmation. That is a wiring issue, a nervous system that learned to protect you by treating every mistake as a potential catastrophe. And it deserved to be treated that way, with understanding, with patience, with the same compassion you would offer someone else who is carrying that. So let me tell you what actually happened, because I think the most useful thing I can do right now is be honest with you about the specific sequence of events, not to rehash it, but because I think there's something in the way it unfolded that a lot of you are going to recognize. I joined a business coaching program because I was in growth mode. I wanted to move faster. I was looking for guidance from people who had built what I was trying to build, and I thought this was the right room to be in. What I didn't fully account for, and honestly what I should have caught sooner, was how much urgency is baked into mainstream business coaching. The messaging, the tactics, the pace, the underlying assumption that more is better, faster is better, that your discomfort is just resistance to overcome. And here's the thing. I know better. I teach this. I have spent years helping trauma survivors recognize exactly that kind of environment and understand why it dysregulates them. But I was so focused on the goal that I overrode what I was actually experiencing. And there was a moment, and I've had moments like this before in my own healing, so I recognized it eventually, where I looked up and I realized I had become the thing I was warning others about. I was doing to myself exactly what the workplaces I help people leave do to their employees. I was overriding my own signals to keep performing. I was pushing past my capacity in service of someone else's framework. I was outsourcing my own judgment to a system that wasn't built for how I work. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. Leaving wasn't comfortable. I want to be clear about that. It was one of the clearest decisions I've ever made, and it still didn't feel good. Clarity and comfort are not the same thing. You can know exactly what the right move is and still grieve the version of the story where it worked out differently. And then there was this question of what to do about my community, because I had shared the program, not extensively, but I had mentioned it. And some of the content I had been putting out during that time carried an energy that wasn't fully mine. It was influenced by tactics I was being taught that I wouldn't have chosen on my own. And my subscribers felt that, even if they couldn't name it. And I felt it too. The apology wasn't about self-flagellation. I want to be really clear about that distinction because I think it matters a lot for those of us with trauma histories who can easily tip from accountability into shame. The apology was about alignment. It was about saying, here's what happened, here's what I learned, here is what I'm committed to going forward. Not I'm terrible and I failed you, but I got off track and I'm back. Because if I'm asking you to honor your own signals, I have to be willing to honor mine. Publicly, even when it's uncomfortable, even when part of me wanted to just quietly move on and hope no one noticed. And here's what I want you to hear about that. Accountability, when it comes from values rather than shame, feels different. It doesn't collapse you. It doesn't spiral you into a hole you can't get out of. It actually steadies you. Because you're not hiding anymore. You're not managing a story. You're just standing in what's true. And there is something about that, even when it's hard, that feels like solid ground. Okay, so here is where we get into the actual work of this episode. I'd like to offer a reframe here, not as a way to bypass the hard feelings, but as something to hold alongside them. Something to return to once your nervous system has had a chance to breathe. When something goes sideways in your career or your business, I invite you to consider that it might be doing one or more of four things. The first thing is clarifying your values. You don't often know exactly what you stand for until you're in a situation that tests it. Not in theory, not what you'd say if someone asked you in an interview or on a coaching call, but in your bones. That program clarified something for me that I couldn't have articulated before I walked into it. I am not willing to use urgency as a growth strategy. I am not willing to build my business on tactics that dysregulate the people I'm trying to serve. Full stop. I knew that intellectually before. I believe I did. But I know it differently now. I know it in a way that I don't think I would have had access to if I hadn't gone through that experience. And knowing that bone deep clarity, is something I get to carry forward into every decision I make about how I build this work. The second thing setbacks can do is reveal your actual capacity. Not your aspirational capacity, not your good day capacity, not the version of you that exists in your best case scenario planning, your current, real, honest to goodness capacity. And I know that can feel defeating. I know it can feel like you're falling short of who you're supposed to be. But I'd like to invite you to sit with something if that feels okay. This is information. It is not a verdict. You might notice a real and important difference between I couldn't sustain this and I'm not enough. One of those is a data point. The other is a story. And for trauma survivors especially, we have to be really careful about which one we're listening to. Your capacity is not fixed. It is not a measure of your worth. It is simply where you are right now. And knowing where you are right now is the only way to make decisions that are actually going to work for you. The third thing is exposing a mismatch that would have cost you more later. I think about this one a lot. If I hadn't left when I did, if I stayed and kept pushing and trying to make it work, what would I have modeled for my community? What would I have built on that foundation? The answer is something that wasn't mine. Something that carried an energy I didn't choose. And at some point, the disconnect between what I was building and what I actually believe would have surfaced anyway. Just with more at stake, more people affected, more distance to travel back to myself. The mismatch that surfaces early is a gift, even when it doesn't feel like one, even when it comes with financial loss or professional embarrassment or the grief of a path that didn't work out. It is still a gift because it's telling you something true before the cost gets higher. And the fourth thing, and this is one you might find worth sitting with, is that navigating a setback with honesty builds a kind of credibility that cannot be manufactured. Your audience, and I'm speaking to those of you who are coaches, consultants, entrepreneurs, anyone who has a community or a professional reputation, your audience is made up of people who have been failed by systems, by institutions, by leaders who said one thing and did another. They have highly calibrated detection for whether someone is performing integrity or actually living it. When you navigate a public setback with honesty and accountability, you're not damaging trust. You are deepening it. You are showing your community what it actually looks like to live in alignment with your values when it costs you something. And that is not something you can fake. And it's not something your competitors can replicate because it only comes from actually doing it. These four things are not comfortable to sit with. I want to be honest about that. But they are useful. And for trauma survivors especially, learning to extract usefulness from painful experiences rather than only bracing for the next one is part of what career resilience actually looks like. Now, I have to say something important before we close because I've given you a framework, and I don't want you to walk away thinking that the work is just identifying which of those four things your setback is doing and then feeling better. It's not that simple. And honestly, if it were that simple, you would have already done it. You cannot think your way out of any of those reframes while your nervous system is still in the acute phase of the setback. You just can't. Your brain doesn't work that way. When your nervous system is activated, when you're in fight or flight, when you're in the shame spiral, when you're in that place of, I can't believe this happened, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for the kind of reflective, meaning-making thinking I've been describing, is offline. And this is where so much well-meaning advice falls apart. Just find the lesson, look for the silver lining, fail forward. Offered to someone who is still in the acute response. That's not how the nervous system works. And for trauma survivors whose nervous systems are often already working harder than average just to get through the day, asking someone to immediately reframe a painful experience is not just unhelpful. It can actually be harmful. It can actually deepen the shame because now you feel like you're failing at failing. So before any of those 4 reframes become accessible, before the clarity, before the capacity assessment, before any of it, there is a prior step. What often needs to happen first is allowing your nervous system to have its response. That means acknowledging that something happened that actually hurt or scared you, not minimizing it, not rushing past it, not performing resilience before you've actually found it. It means noticing where the setback might be living in your body, because for many of us, it will live somewhere. Your chest, your throat, your stomach, somewhere. And allowing that a little room before you start strategizing. It means being gentle with yourself about not being further along than you are. Now, I want to speak to those of you who are in entrepreneurship or leadership, because I know the pressure is different at this level. Your livelihood is connected to your professional reputation. Your ability to show up affects other people. The stakes feel higher and the expectation to bounce back quickly is intense. Sometimes from the outside and often from inside yourself. I understand that pressure. I really do. I felt it acutely after last week's episode. The part of me that wanted to just move on, get back to business, prove that it didn't affect me. But here's what I know to be true. A regulated return is almost always more effective and more sustainable than a reactive one. When you rush back before you're ready, you're operating from the wound. You're making decisions from a place of wanting to prove something or escape something or fix something quickly. And those decisions tend to create more problems than they solve. When you take the time to actually move through the experience, to let your nervous system complete its response, to find your footing again, to return from a place of steadiness, what you build from that place is different. It's more yours. It holds up better. The question I'd like to leave you with isn't, how fast can I turn this around? It's, how do I move through this in a way that I can be proud of? Those are very different questions, and they lead to very different outcomes. Here's what I'd like to leave you with today. Last week's episode was about making an aligned decision, even a hard one, when a situation no longer matches your values. This week is about, what do you do with the aftermath? What do you do when the dust settles and you're sitting with the discomfort of having done something brave and difficult, and now you have to figure out what comes next? And my honest answer is, you don't have to have it figured out right away. You are allowed to sit with the discomfort. You're allowed to feel it before you frame it. You're allowed to let the lesson arrive on its own timeline, rather than forcing it into a tidy narrative because that's more comfortable. What I can tell you is that every single thing I know about trauma-informed career development, I mean the things I know in the kind of way that can't be taken away from me, the things that are mine because I earned them. Every single one of those things came from something that, at the time, felt like a failure. That doesn't make the hard moments worth it in some neat, tidy way. I'm not going to tell you that everything happens for a reason or that the pain was necessary. I don't know that. What I know is that it wasn't wasted. What I know is that I am a better coach, a more honest voice, a more grounded presence for my community because of it. And I believe the same thing is possible for you. If you are in the middle of something right now that feels like a setback, a job situation, a business decision, a professional relationship that didn't go the way that you'd hoped, something you're still not sure how to talk about, and you'd like to work through it with someone who is going to meet you where you actually are, I would love to connect with you. You can book a discovery call with me and we'll talk about where you are, what's feeling hard, and what support could actually look like for you right now. Not a pitch, just a real conversation. The link is in the show notes. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next week. You're not walking this path alone. Every step you take toward a trauma-wise career is an act of courage, and I'm here cheering you on. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with another survivor who needs to hear this message. Together, we're rewriting the rules of career success. Keep rising, keep healing, keep building.